This is a peanut plant. I'm going to show you how to grow it. Let's go. So as I stated, this growing guide will be on peanuts. Peanuts are super easy to grow, very fun, so this will not be a long growing guide. Usually our growing guides are decent length, around 10, 12 minutes. I don't think it's gonna be that long, but we'll see by the time we're done. It's very, very simple. You do not need to overcomplicate peanuts because first and foremost, they're a nitrogen fixing legume. As long as you give them a very good inoculation of beneficial bacteria, they will be able to fix nitrogen, and that nitrogen should be enough to feed them as long as your soil is at least in moderately good condition. So you do need some organic matter in the soil. It does need to be well draining. It does need to be loose, which we'll get into why in a second. But not only just not for the plant to grow and for the root development to be adequate, but you also need adequate you also need adequate looseness for the flowers, because the flowers are what creates the peanuts. Now, this is a crazy concept that I absolutely find just the most fascinating thing, probably in any plant in the garden. This is the most fascinating thing. The flowers are little yellow flowers. Actually, we have one flowering right here. I'll show you a close-up in a second. And those flowers, they will actually, when the plant grows and touches the ground, they will actually poke the flower into the ground, and then it will actually form the peanut at the end of the flower. But you won't have peanuts just dangling in the air. They actually have to be touching the soil in order to form the peanut. It is a wild, wild concept. So you do need loose soil for that, but also for adequate root development and things like that. So we're growing them in pure compost here, but you can do a very loose potting mix, things like that. If you want to grow them in containers, we do get asked about that all the time. Luke, can I grow peanuts in containers? Yes. Yes, you can. They are very easy, and I do recommend that because for people that don't want to sacrifice gardening space on something that may not do that well, or maybe they're trying for the first time, a container is always a great sacrificial gardening spot, because if it does poorly, well, you just lost the space that the container took up and not your actual gardening space, which usually people dedicate to plants they know are going to do well. So definitely don't hesitate putting it in a container. It will do very, very well. And the growing guide actually applies completely the same to this growing guide. So we will not have a separate growing guide for growing peanuts in containers, because everything else is consistent other than you have it in a container versus in the soil. So let's get into spacing. I think that's a very important thing to talk about. When you put your when you put your peanuts in the ground, you need to space them at least 1.5 feet apart, because they need to grow and vine. Peanuts, when they grow, they're going to grow up very tall, and a lot of times people cram them together. When they grow, they will grow up and then fall down from the weight. And that is very, very important, because the flowers will form all along the stems as they grow. And when they touch the ground, again, that is what forms the peanuts. So you need them to be able to grow up and fall down. If you have them very crowded, they're going to be able to support themselves up, and you don't want them to support themselves. These are one of the only plants that I would typically say you never, ever, ever want them up in the air. You want them on the ground, because that means you're going to get more peanuts. So definitely, I typically give them about 1.5 feet spacing to let them kind of do their thing, if you will. And they will get rather large when they're fully mature. Now, when it comes to harvesting, you want to make sure that this is forward looking, a very long ways away. You want to make sure that the entire plant is turning yellow and dying. Peanuts do not like to be harvested early. And by peanuts, I mean the fruit. You'll find that the fruit will not be mature if you harvest them while the plant is still green. You want to make sure that most of the plant has turned yellow. And that's because all that energy is actually going into forming the peanuts. If you want to pull up a green plant, just get ready to pick about 90% of the shells empty, and you'll have wasted all your time. So please do wait. It's a huge tip that I can give you guys. Everyone always wonders, how do I know when they're ripe? That is how you can tell. Wait for most of the plant to be yellowing. if not dying, and you'll be fine. Now, when it comes to watering, this is also a very important tip. You want the soil to remain moist. You do not want any stress on your plants because they will need to be growing all season long. Any stress will set them back. And peanuts are one of the plants that you really need to replicate their original environment. Here in Michigan, we have a hard time growing peanuts super successfully because our climate is really against us. Peanuts are actually native to tropical rainforests, and so they find them oftentimes wild in the Amazon rainforest. Now, these are a more cultivated variety, and actually we got these from our local greenhouse. You can get them at garden centers nowadays because they're becoming more popular, and I think that's really cool because it helps people understand more about where their food is coming from and how it actually grows, and I think that is awesome. So we picked these up, threw them in the ground. They're doing amazing here, but you can start them from seed as well, and that leads me to another topic as well as starting from seed. It's just the same. Just pop a seed in the ground and you'll have a plant. Just make sure you put about 2 seeds per hole and space the holes out about 1.5 feet, and you'll have what we have here in about 2 months or so. So going back to replicating their environment, you want to make sure that it gets adequate water. In the rainforest, it does not get, like 3 weeks of dry weather. It gets water on a very consistent basis. Now, that does not mean flooding. You're going to have a lot of root rot, but make sure that it gets adequate water, just like the rest of your garden should get adequate water. Make sure it's at least damp to the touch, 2 inches down, and never any drier, because that's going to put a lot of stress on the peanuts, and you need them to be stress-free. Another thing is having the right temperature. If your nights do not get above 55 degrees, you're not going to have peanuts. Peanuts need a high humidity, high temperature environment. And here in Michigan, sometimes our nights get below 55 degrees, but that's why we plant them. We typically plant them a little later in the season so that they are growing in the hot weather, and then hopefully the nights are at least above 60 degrees, and right now they are, thank goodness, and they're going to do fine, I think. But some seasons, the nights are abnormally cold here in Michigan, and so those are years that we don't really get a whole lot of production out of the peanuts. But they're still a fun one to grow. They're still fun to grow at least a few plants, so that's why we always do. But yes, you have to make sure that the nights are above 55 degrees, otherwise you're just not going to get anything at all. Also, make sure you're in at least a location that's going to have a minimum of 30 to 40% humidity. Most people have that. The more humid, the better though. So if you're in like Mississippi, Alabama, places like that, you're going to have far better success growing peanuts because that high humidity, super high temperature is what they really love. So that's something that you want, that you're going to have going for you if you live down south. The next thing is soil pH. This is really, really important, and we always want to make sure that your soil is slightly acidic. Peanuts do not, and I repeat, do not like alkali soil. If your soil is anything higher than a pH of 7, you're going to need to put in some soil acidifier. Thank goodness our soil is right around 6.0. I didn't have to do anything, and that's easier for me, but again, a soil test will answer those questions if you need to amend or not with some soil sulfur. But yeah, so our soil is right around 6.0. That is great. 5.5 is about the ticket point there where you really want to be slightly acidic because their native soil where they grow is slightly acidic. So 6.0 is still great for that. And 6.5 you'll still do just fine. Now the final thing I want to talk about is sun exposure. When it comes to sun exposure, you need to make sure these peanuts here get full sun. They need full sun because the more energy the plant can produce, the more it's going to grow and the more it's going to produce. So if you want an adequate peanut harvest, I keep wanting to say potato, goodness gracious. If you want an adequate peanut harvest, you gotta make sure that the peanuts are nice and full and large, and the only way they're gonna do that is with full sun. So make sure they get between 5 and 7 hours of sun. If you can give them more, that's great, but at least 5 to 7 hours is going to be adequate. So there you go, there is how to grow peanuts. They are super fun. Hopefully you enjoyed this growing guide, and it's definitely a fun new one. So if you did like this video, remember to share this video with a friend, like this video because that really helps us out, and also check out our other growing guides. We have a playlist now chock full of growing guides. I think we have like 35 growing guides. So make sure you check them out. It's gonna be a wealth of information for you. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel reminding you to grow big, grow some peanuts, or go home, and we'll talk to you all later. See ya. Bye.